Hello, Internet! I am Axolotl, and today I want to talk about the many trainers in the world of Pokémon. Specifically, who is the best trainer in the games. I'll be looking at every variation of the characters in the mainline games, Legends Arceus, and remakes. However, I won't be looking at most of the spin-off games, like Pokémon Colosseum or Pokémon Ranger. I'll be looking at everything from the teams of the trainers, their ranks, and just how powerful they seem to be based on all the information in the games. This video is not about how well these trainers would do in competitive Pokémon, because oftentimes lore and in-game mechanics don't line up perfectly. However, I will be looking at how hard these fights are in the games, because you could have different elements that don't necessarily work in competitive, but work well against a playthrough team. Oh yeah, and I'm not going to be counting any player characters, because there are millions of possibilities for those, and it would be really short video, because the player character would always be the strongest. This includes Red. And of course, this is just my opinion. If you think differently, let me know in the comments. But this is just how I see different trainers. Spoiler warning for all of Pokemon. So to start, I will be talking about some honourable mentions and one dishonourable mention before we get to the final choice. First up is Volo from Legends Arceus. In my opinion, Volo is one of the hardest battles in all of Pokemon, as he essentially has 8 Pokemon, with both of Giratina's forms being added in addition to his team of 6. And even his standard team of 6 is no joke. It's almost identical to Cynthia's, except the Gastrodon Milotic are switched with a Togekiss and a Hisuian Arcanine. Also, he's able to control Giratina, which is something that only player characters have been able to do so far in the series. This says a lot about how powerful he is as a trainer. When I originally wrote the script for this video, Volo was the strongest character until something last minute changed my mind. However, Volo's weakness is that the fights are only hard because he has 8 Pokemon, which wouldn't work in a standard battle. And with the fact that the battle is actually really unexpected. And also, 2 of his 8 Pokemon were Giratina. That's not really a fair fight, is it? But even if you remove the 2 Giratinas and the surprise, he's still quite a strong trainer. His main downside is the fact that he doesn't have access to any gimmicks, which is a serious disadvantage. Like, he can use Agile and Strong Style, but that's not the trump card the mainline game's gimmicks are. And also, he's probably just kind of a weaker version of Cynthia, if you really think about it. Even though he's amazing and my favourite villain in all of Pokemon, he's just not strong enough to claim the title of strongest trainer. Next up is Volo's descendant, Cynthia. Cynthia is a trainer so formidable, her theme strikes fear in the hearts of any long-time Pokemon fan. Cynthia is an incredible trainer, in every appearance with an incredible team, and her ace is a Garchomp, which is an incredibly formidable Pokemon. Her appearance in BSP is especially frightening, considering she has a fully competitive team. Cynthia is a champion who lives up to the title. Cynthia doesn't have any major downsides, boasting no extreme weaknesses, and overall being a really solid trainer. She also has the advantage of appearing throughout the game, and not just at the end. Damn fur. This helps the idea of her being a strong trainer be an ever-present idea. However, because of how early she was made, she existed before any of the gimmicks, meaning she never had access to them outside of the anime and maybe spin-offs, I'm not entirely sure. And while that isn't an instant deal breaker, they're just other trainers who are just as formidable as her, but have access to the gimmicks. Honestly, out of this list, Cynthia is the trainer I wish I could say was the strongest. And she probably would be if she was made later on in the games. Unfortunately, she is a victim to power creep. Next up on the list is Steven Stone. He is the champion of Hoenn, and he's an amazing trainer. He has a Pseudo Legendary Metagross as his ace, similar to how Cynthia had Garchomp. He's also the first trainer on this list to have access to a gimmick, that being Mega Evolution in the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire games. His teams are pretty decent, not on the level of Cynthia or Volo, but he still uses some pretty powerful Pokemon, and it's a lot better than some other champions, like Geeta. Steven is another champion who lives up to the title, being only slightly less impressive than Cynthia, but his access to Mega Evolution evens him out a tiny bit. Like Cynthia, Steven is ever-present throughout the story, which helps cement the idea that he's a really strong trainer in the player's mind. However, Steven has one major weakness, and that is that his teams have horrible type diversity. They don't have a single Pokemon that is not either Rock, Ground, or Steel type. And while that isn't as egregious as some other type specialists, it's still a massive weakness, and it's enough for me not to make him the strongest trainer. And honestly, I still think Cynthia is a tiny bit stronger than him, even if he has Mega Evolution. Next, we have somewhat of a dishonourable mention, with Geeta from Paldea, the top champion as she calls herself. Like Steven and Cynthia, she appears throughout the game and is constantly complimented by Nemona, being called strong, powerful, a great trainer, all that jazz. And she's even called the top champion instead of just champion, like every other region, which makes it sound really strong, but the game also makes it abundantly clear that she was beaten by another trainer, that being Nimona, or anybody else who has champion rank, because in Paldea, there are multiple for some reason. And since she says herself she is utterly incapable of holding back in a fight, that means the so-called champion has been beaten by every other trainer who's ranked below her if they're just champion rank. Meaning she's actually the worst champion despite being called the top champion, since she was beaten by every other champion when she was going all out. In her defence, Gita has some amazing Pokemon, like her Glimora, which is an amazing Toxic Spikes setter with its ability Toxic Debris. Or her Kingambit, which would make it excellent ace because of its ability that makes it stronger the more Pokemon have fainted. So if you send it out last, it's a really powerful Pokemon. So those sound like points towards Gita, right? Wrong! Because she uses them wrong. For some reason, Glimora is her ace, not Kingambit, which means it gets sent out at the end of the battle, making its ability almost useless. Because Toxic Spikes is best used at the start of the game so you can affect as many Pokemon as possible, not like at max 1 or 2. And also, she sends her Kingambit out really early, which means it can barely use its ability. These 8-hit abilities are nearly useless. And her other Pokemon aren't even that good. She has a Go-Goat for some reason. Why would a champion in Paldea have a really below-average mon from X and Y? Now, don't get me wrong, I love Go-Goat. It's an amazing Pokemon, one of my favourites. But it's not a champion tier Pokemon. And it'd be fine if the Go-Goat was used to balance out Kingambit and Glimora, but the Kingambit and Glimora, even though are really powerful Pokemon, are barely used. Because if they're not used correctly, they're pretty weak. And although her horrible team composition is fixed in the DLC, the damage is already done and she just does not feel powerful anymore. And what's worse is that she's nowhere near the strongest trainer in her own game. That's not even counting the DLC. She's weaker than Demona, Arven, the AI professors, and Director Clavel. I know this wasn't relevant to this video because it's about the strongest trainers, not the weakest, but I'm bringing Nimona next, and it only makes sense to mention why Nimona is somehow stronger than her own superior. Now, Nimona, who is the actual strongest champion in Paldea so far. We don't know how many of them there are, so there could be a stronger one, but seems unlikely considering Nimona is terrifying. Nimona's insane strength is brought up throughout the entire game, like, constantly. She doesn't even use her actual team when fighting her, because she's too powerful. She has to make a new team from scratch just to battle the player. And she has to hold back the entire game because she's just so far ahead of every other character. The only time we get to see her going all out is in her final battle. But we also don't get to see her actual team, so she's probably not even at max strength in that fight. And believe me, that is one hard battle. And she's so obsessed with battle, like when she's even being mind-controlled by Petulant, she's still constantly talking about battle. That's how powerful just her sheer willpower is when it comes to battle. And her team is really good. She has a pseudo-legendary on it, and it's not even her ace. That being Guja, which is, the best pseudo, just so you know. Totally not biased or anything. Nimona can also use the gimmicks using Terastallization, which, even though it's not as flashy as the others, when used right, can be really powerful, especially in combination with the really powerful starters of that generation. Nimona doesn't really have any massive downsides. She just doesn't win purely because of the sheer might of the actual winner. If it wasn't for that trainer, Nimona probably could have won. But unfortunately, like Gita, Nimona's also not the strongest trainer in her region. She's beaten by the AI professors. Well, she never fights them, but they are stronger than her by quite a wide margin. Now, moving on. So, these champions weren't in order, but the last three are. First up is Giovanni, the leader of Team Rocket. Since he's from Kanto, Game Freak's favourite region, he's appeared in a lot of Pokemon games. But I believe his strongest appearance would be when he's part of Team Rainbow Rocket in the Ultra Sun and Moon games. Because even though in this fight he only has 5 Pokemon instead of the max 6, one of these Pokemon is Mega Mewtwo, either X or Y depending on the version of the game you're playing. And Mega Mewtwo was the Pokemon the highest base at total, time with Rayquaza time of release. Of course, now it's Eternatus, but that wasn't the case back then. And this Giovanni is actually from a different reality where he actually succeeded in the Gen 1 games, where he was able to take over the region, making one of the only trainers to have actually technically beat a player character, even if it was an alternate version of a player character. However, no matter which way you slice it, Giovanni is not the strongest trainer. If you take any of his early appearances, he had no access to gimmicks, and his team was, although good, not as strong as some of the other gimmickless trainers like Cynthia. Or if you take the one time where he had Mega Evolution, he only had 5 Pokemon, which, is not a good sign, and is not something the strongest trainer would have. But just because he technically beat a player character, that's enough to get him the third place spot. In second, we have the undefeated champion, Leon, from Generation 8. Leon is hyped up all game to actually an annoying amount, but unlike Gita, he actually lives up to his title. He actually defeats the big bad Eternatus on a one-on-one fight. Well, that is before it goes to Eternamax Eternatus, but that actually requires the player character, Hop, and the legendary heroes to beat. Leon also has a really good team, with his opener Aegislash being an incredible Pokemon that excels in both attack and defense thanks to its amazing ability. He also has a pseudo-legendary Dragapult, which is just really good, and his ace Pokemon is Charizard, which is a good Pokemon normally, but especially when you give it Gigantamax, it's an amazing Pokemon. Access to Dynamax and Gigantamax doesn't actually feel that powerful in the game, because the player themselves also has access to it. But you have to remember, most trainers don't have access to Dynamax. It's an incredibly rare thing, being exclusive to Galar. And again, the game makes a big deal of saying he was undefeated until the player character beat him, which is not really said about many of the characters. All the characters do have 1 or 2 defeats under their belt. This literally means from the day he got his first Pokemon, this man never lost a fight, which is just ridiculous. I couldn't decide for a long while who should be the top trainer between Leon and our number 1 spot, but the fact that Leon can't use Dynamax or Gigantamax outside of Galar was enough to put him down to only number 2. Because although he's really strong without Gigantamax still, it's his trump card and other gimmicks are usable in any region, even if you can only acquire each of them in 1 or 2 regions. Or 3 for Mega Evolution, but that's like an outlier. And finally, the strongest trainer is actually 2 trainers, because they're kind of the same, but they're kind of not. The strongest trainer is the AI Professor, in my opinion, being either Professor Turo or Professor Sada, depending on which game you're playing between Scarlet and Violet. The AI Professor only really shows up at the end of the game, which would normally be a weakness because we're not able to see much of their strength because there's not many instances for them to show it off. However, when they get introduced, they come in swinging. They are a strong trainer. We do technically meet them a long while ago at the start of the game, but they're pretending to be their creators, so it doesn't really count, and also don't actually hear anything about them battling until the end of the game. Mostly because it is an insane twist. So I can excuse the lack of them showing off their power for how awesome the twist it is and how well they show it off when they actually start battling. The AI Professor's teams are made entirely of Paradox Pokemon, either past or future depending on the game. And Paradox Pokemon are strong. Singular Paradox Pokemon are boss fights throughout the entire game, with you fighting either Great Tusks or Iron Shreds in the desert at one point, or when you're in Area 0, you fight the Paradox Pokemon one at a time with your whole team, while also being partnered up in a double battle with one of your allies, like Nemona, who is already a really strong trainer. This just shows how strong Paradox Pokemon are, which then shows how strong someone who can command 6 of them with ease is. Also, this doesn't really mean much since it also applies to Giovanni, but all their Pokeballs are Master Balls, which is just the biggest flex. The AI Professors also have access to Terrestrialization, which, unlike Gigantamax, has been proven to be able to use outside of Paldea, as we see in the Indigo Disc DLC that it can be used in Unova. The AI Professors are also part of a very limited group of trainers who can use legendaries without end up getting killed by them, as they use either Miraidon or Koraidon depending on the game. And although this is a 7th Pokemon, like Volo has 8 Pokemon, I don't need to take this into consideration because it's more of a interactable cutscene, because you can't lose the fight against Miraidon and Koraidon because you yourself have Miraidon and Koraidon, which won't die because of friendship and all that jazz. And also, Paldea already has some really strong trainers like Mona or Arven, and the fact that the AI Professors are really hard in the game where you're used to that proves how strong they are. Also, they have an absolutely killer theme, which isn't bonus points, but it's just like, I had to mention it, it's so good. It also distracts the opponent because they're too busy jamming out to some of the best boss fight music I've ever heard. But yeah, that's what I think is the strongest trainer in all of Pokemon. But again, that's just my opinion. If you disagree, tell me in the comments. I have been Axolotl. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. And see you next time.